Los Angeles. The waterfront. Tourists, coffee shops, relaxation. Everything was going on as usual. Jade Harris stood in the midst of this noise, unobtrusive, just like everyone else. A tracksuit, dark glasses, no signs that she was a police lieutenant. She was undercover. The task was to bust a smuggler she had been following for several weeks. The man disappeared into the crowd, and Jade followed him at a distance, watching his every move carefully. She was almost ready to signal her own when she heard a sharp voice. "Hands where I can see them," came the order. Jade instantly turned around. Officer Becca Gray was standing in front of her, proactive, with an expression on her face that told her right away that she intended to detain Jade. What? Jade couldn't understand. She wasn't even surprised, because she had faced prejudice many times before. But this situation was too absurd. "Hands," repeated Becca, approaching at lightning speed. "You don't want to tell me why you're here?" "I'm just practicing, officer." "What do you want?" Jade tried not to raise her voice, but she could feel her patience melting away. Her appearance couldn't be a cause for suspicion, but Jade's skin was already her problem. "Are you working out? Don't you realize what's going on here? And where are your papers?" Becca was already coming closer, preparing to grab her arm. "It's not my fault. Why don't you understand? I'm the police." Jade held up her hands to explain, but Becca wasn't listening. Her eyes filled with a cold look, and her smile looked more like contempt. "Are you the police, dressed like that? Or did you just decide to plant something under the noses of tourists here? Some kind of a thief?" Becca laughed, obviously not going to listen to explanations. "Check my papers." Jade tried to stay calm again. "That's enough. Put your hands behind your back." The officer no longer heard any explanations. Her movements became abrupt and rough, and Jade felt her arm grabbed and the handcuffs tightened. "What are you doing?" "I'm Lieutenant Harris." Jade tried to get away, but the shackles were in place, and every movement only hurt. "You are?" Becca laughed. "The lieutenant? In your sneakers and tracksuit? Are you running in the woods?" Tourists on both sides started filming, and Jade felt her anger bubbling up. She tried to scream, but the sound didn't matter anymore. The entire crowd saw her being led away, and it was clear that no one believed she could be a police officer. "They won't understand you," Becca said as she approached her to secure the shackles. "You're already trapped. Do something right." Jade felt her patience dry up. All these years she had given to the service, and now she was simply detained because of the color of her skin. It was security for one, and cruel injustice for the other. Her future hung in the balance as Becca gleefully talked over the radio. "We have a suspicious person here, right on the waterfront. We're taking her in for questioning." "I'm not a suspicious person." Jade was almost boiling with anger. "Call the station. I'm Lieutenant Harris." But Becca wasn't listening. She just dragged her to the police car, laughing with every step she took. "Do you really want to believe that this is going to go away?" asked Becca, smiling again as Jade tried to fight for freedom. "Check my papers, now." Jade was ready to go through all this to prove who she really was. Every step, every moment felt incredibly difficult. Jade knew that this time, no witness, no situation would help her if she couldn't convince Becca that she was who she really was. All her experience became irrelevant. What was normal for her turned into an invisible wall that was difficult to overcome. There was no going back. All she could do was find a way out of this trap. The department was cold and sterile. Jade sat in a hard chair in the interrogation room, her hands cuffed, though she had no intention of wearing them. She tried to keep her nerves in check, but her anger did not subside. The more she tried to explain, the more she felt ignored. The radio was playing again. "Check the database. This woman says she is a lieutenant. I just don't believe it. She's definitely a thief," Becca commented, not even thinking about what she was saying. Jade gritted her teeth. This was more than just a false arrest. It was targeted discrimination, and it was leading her to the worst. Becca tried to cover up her mistake, and all Jade could do was wait for support. From the moment she was thrown into the detention center, everything was only going to go to the point where she could lose everything. The door opened and Sergeant Mark Smith, her colleague, entered the room. He stopped at the door, and his eyes instantly took in her condition. "What's going on, Harris?" he asked, hiding his surprise behind a professional face. He had been working with her for years and knew her as one of the best officers. "Can't you see? Becca has detained me. She doesn't want to listen." Jade sat down heavily in her chair, feeling the pain pressing in. She was ready for her career to end right now. Mark looked at the shackles, then at Jade, and silently walked out. He returned a few minutes later with the other officers, and Jade felt the pressure on her ease. However, in her heart, Everything was on edge. While she was sitting in that room, dozens of messages came to her phone. The video had already gone viral, race and law enforcement. She became the object of ridicule and rejection because of her skin color. Mark returned to the room and came closer to her. "You were tested. Is it true you are a lieutenant?" he asked with a serious expression. "Are you too?" Jade tried to keep her anger at bay, but this moment was disastrous. "Don't you understand, Mark? This isn't just a mistake. This is a manipulation, an insult. I'm here because of my skin." She didn't even listen when I told her who I was. Mark was silent. He looked at her shackles. Then, as if he had made an important decision, he walked to the door. "I'm going to do everything I can to fix this, Harris. Hang in there." A few minutes later, Jade found herself in front of Sergeant Lopez, who was her superior and knew her well as a professional. He threw the bag on the table and looked at her quietly. "Why are you in handcuffs?" His voice was calm, but tinged with anger. "She doesn't believe me, Captain, just because I'm black." There was no proof. I tried several times to tell her who I was, but that was undignified of her. "They'll contact the police. You should be free." Lopez pulled out his phone. Jade stared at it, but it still couldn't calm her down. She was tired of people seeing her only because of the color of her skin. All these years of struggle, all these achievements, and now she was being humiliated. "Look, Lopez, I'm not going to give up. If this is just part of the struggle, I'm ready to go through it. But I have to stop Becca." Lopez turned to her, and a stern expression appeared on his face. "I know you can do it, Harris. But don't make any hasty moves. We'll take it from here." But Jade knew this was only the beginning. She couldn't let this go. This wasn't just a police officer's mistake. It was a message to the world that her skin still put her in situations where she had to prove her worth. An hour later, she was already outside, but there was no relief in her heart. The street was quiet, but Jade felt every step as if there was a huge wall in front of her that she had to overcome. The street was ordinary, but to Jade it looked empty. Even though she was standing on the waterfront, it seemed to her that the whole world had fallen silent for a moment. Whether to protest or remain silent was a question that haunted her. Her mind was racing, but when she got into the car, everything seemed to freeze. "Are you okay?" asked Mark, sitting next to her. He could sense the atmosphere that had changed since the interrogation. They all knew that it was not just a mistake. This was a system that saw nothing but her skin and Jade. "We're not okay," Jade replied, squeezing her fingers over the text messages that were almost burning on her phone screen. The video of the scene on the waterfront had already made the rounds on social media. It was more than just a scandal. She became the object of ridicule and mockery. Her every move, her every word was condemned. "You don't have to take this, Harris. This is pure humiliation," Mark said. "I don't think this story will end quickly. You know I'm here for you." But we're going to lose again," Jade interrupted. She knew what he was going to say, but she was tired of promises. "You can't win against a system that's always stacked against you. They focus on skin color. And if your skin color is your main disadvantage in your job, you will never win." Mark was silent. He didn't know what to say. He was her friend, but even he realized that this was more than just an incompatibility. It was a systemic pain, deeply rooted in every step, every decision. "What now?" he asked, not trying to deny it. "Now I'm going to take it all back," Jade said firmly. "I'm not going to let them ruin my career because of their stupid prejudice." That night, she could no longer just sit at home. The video of her arrest continued to gain views. Thousands of comments, some supportive, some ridiculing. But what bothered her the most was that she had become an object of pity rather than an example to fight for. Her name was no longer just Lieutenant Harris, but also victim of racism. She picked up her laptop and started scrolling through the news. "Hey Race," a new headline. "LAPD fails again to stop racism." It was her name in the headline, and this headline was again a marker of her defeat. Everyone knows it's not true, but for some reason it continues to be perceived that way. In the hours that followed, Jade began searching for evidence to turn the tide. She called her people, checked records. But every time she looked at the monitor, her face became more and more tense. It turned out that Becca had already filed a report on her misconduct, another step to break her. "They're not going to stop," she said, picking out a few photos and recordings to show everyone who the real criminal is here. Jade knew her fight was just beginning. She couldn't let Becca or the system win. She couldn't let this go because this wasn't just a personal affront. It was a battle for her honor and professional dignity. and for the dignity of everyone who faces such injustice every day. In going to break it, she said out loud to herself as the screen showed another news story about racism in the police. Jade was sitting in her car, her hands tightly gripping the steering wheel. She was on the verge of a serious struggle, and her every movement was tense. The video on social media was spreading. Protests took to the streets of Los Angeles. People supported her, accusing the police system of bias and racism. But with each passing minute, Jade realized that this was not just a fight against Becca or a few unscrupulous officers. It was a war against the system itself. Mark sat next to her, watching her face change with each passing moment of the news. "Are you serious about going to the next step?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but his concern was palpable. "I can't stop. This situation isn't just about me anymore. It's about everyone who has to deal with someone like me every day," Jade replied calmly, but with great determination in her voice. "Don't forget that this could destroy you." Mark looked at her hands, which were marked with shackle marks. "You know how many people in the police force are looking for a reason to put you in your place right now. What's happening now doesn't matter, Mark. I'm not going to let them win. I'm not going to let them silence me." Her voice sounded firm, without the slightest hesitation. She didn't notice her car pull up in front of the police station. Jade took a deep breath, and her eyes flickered with fatigue. She knew that this could be the last step that would lead to a struggle that could not be won without harm. Mark sat in silence, watching her decision carefully. He knew that she could not stay on the margins any longer, that her sense of justice would not allow her to fall in line with this corrupt system. And so they stood in front of the police station, ready to face a reality that promised to be more painful than anything Jade had experienced before. "Do it," he finally said. Jade got out of the car. Her eyes burned with the determination of someone who knows that not only her career, but her entire identity is at stake. She walked through the door of the station, her steps confident, as if she had been here before. It was quiet inside the station. The officers were working, but each one of them was looking at Jade as if she had brought a storm with her. She walked to her office, took off her jacket, sat down at her desk, and started looking through all the records. She had the documents, the evidence, everything she needed to take this situation to the next level. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. It was Lopez. He looked calm, but there was something heavy in his eyes. "Harris," he began, sitting down across from me. "I know what you want to do, and I understand your motives. But you have to realize that this is a big deal." "I understand." Jade looked up, her eyes meeting his. "But it's not about me. It's about what I'm trying to accomplish. And if I don't fight for the truth now, we're all going to be left in the dark." Lopez remained silent, but his face gradually changed. He saw in her eyes not just a struggle to restore her reputation, but a struggle to change the system in which they worked. "You can't do this without us," he said after a pause. "I will go to higher authorities. We will check everything. But you need to be prepared for the fact that it will be difficult. And not everyone will be on your side." "I'm ready." Jade tossed back her hair and picked up some papers from the table. "I'm not giving up." Lopez left, and Jade was left alone in her office. Sirens could be heard outside the window, and the street noise only emphasized the atmosphere of tension. She picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Do you have any news?" she asked when her contact in the technical department answered on the other end of the line. "Yes. I've discovered that Becca has a long history of ties to smugglers. All her contacts lead back to her," the voice replied. "They'll send you everything I found." "Good. Work fast, and do it quietly. Everyone knows who I am now. We need to destroy this right away." Jade turned off her phone and looked back at the documents in front of her. She knew that only a truthful investigation and a fight against the system would allow her to put things back to the way they were. One step closer to victory, and she was ready to act. This was only the beginning of her real fight. Los Angeles. The police station is filled with breathless silence. Jade Harris sits at her desk, studying the new documents that have fallen into her hands. She knew that everything that had happened over the past few days was just the beginning of a bigger battle. The video of her detention was just one moment out of many others that would haunt her for a long time to come until she took control. But now she was ready. Her determination was unstoppable. All of her steps, even the smallest ones, were now calculated. She could not afford to make a mistake, and her every move was dictated by a single goal: to restore justice, not only for herself, but for all those who suffer discrimination and inequality. She knew that these weeks could change her life forever. What happened was now her name on every scoreboard and in every article. Jade tried to come to terms with the fact that she had become a symbol, but the fight had only just begun. The phone rings again, and she picks it up. Harris. It was the voice of one of her people from the technical department. We found more evidence. Checks on Becca's accounts have confirmed the smuggling ties. This will be the final blow. I've already prepared everything. We need to act now, Jade replied, her voice no longer sounding as calm as before. She could feel her heart beating faster as she got closer to the end. A few hours later, Jade meets with Mark and Lopez. They discuss the last steps, all possible scenarios. The situation was critical. They had to act decisively, because if they wanted to stop the smugglers, they had to stop Becca, otherwise everything would be lost. We have to take her in, otherwise she's just going to run away, Jade says. She is holding up the latest documents, which clearly show who her accomplice was and how she hid her ties to the smugglers. Are you sure? Lopez looks at her carefully, as if studying her every move. Everyone knew it was risky, but Jade had no choice. If we don't do this now, it'll be too late tomorrow. Her voice is firm. She knows this is her only option. You're right. Lopez looks over at Mark. Sources confirm that Becca is planning to escape. We can't let her get away. Later, on the streets of Los Angeles, police cars quietly approach the building where intelligence says Becca is hiding. Jade, Lopez, and several officers and their team quickly get out of the cars and head for the door. Harris, are you ready? Asks Lopez, looking at her serious face. More than ever, she replies, her eyes shining with determination. They rush in. Becca tries to escape, but the team quickly detains her. All of her crimes, her ties to smugglers, manipulation of the situation, attempts to tamper with evidence, become apparent. You will not escape responsibility, Jade declares, looking at Becca, who now seems small and helpless compared to her former stubbornness. You're going to ruin everything for me. Becca tries to struggle, but there's nothing she can do. You ruined it all yourself, Jade replies quietly, relieved. She knew that she had won not only this case, but also her personal struggle. It was more than just a case. It was a challenge to the system. After Becca's arrest, the whole situation became highly publicized. The connections Jade uncovered shook not only the police but the entire city administration. The accusations that Jade was initially the target of discrimination now took a real turn. People began to realize that the problem was not limited to individual cases. They saw how far these systemic problems could go. A few weeks after her arrest, Jade returns to the police station, albeit with signs of fatigue. Lopez meets her at the door. You did it, he says, and Jade realizes that her struggle has paid off. It's not just my victory, Jade replies, smiling. It's a victory for everyone who is trying to change the system. She put on her police uniform again and sat down at her desk. In her hands was not only a weapon or a document, but also real power, the power of truth, the power of change. And although Jade's face was not happy, she knew that this was only the beginning. Jade stood on the balcony of her apartment, gazing out at Los Angeles at night. The city was the same as always, lively, bustling, but now everything was changing for her. The video of her detention had become a symbol, and now people were looking at justice and equality in society in a new way. She was relieved that Becca and her accomplices had been brought to justice, but it was not the end. The feeling that the system had not yet changed remained. Jade knew this was only the first victory, but there were new battles ahead. She could now move forward as not just a police lieutenant, but as someone who had made a difference in the system. She would return to her duties, but with a different kind of self-confidence. Although there would be many more challenges on the road to change, Jade was no longer afraid to go all the way. You're a real hero, said Mark, who stood behind her, looking out over the city. This is just the beginning. Yes, Jade replied with a sigh, but I'm ready for anything.